I never imagined that the decisions I made with my husband would come back to haunt me in such a dramatic and unforgiving way. Looking back, the path that led to the ruin of our relationship with my sister-in-law's children was paved with good intentions, sacrifices, and an unwavering commitment to family. In our younger years, my husband and I believed that supporting our extended family was not only a duty, but also an honor. When his sister faced hardships and financial struggles, we extended our hand in solidarity, not knowing that this act of generosity would sow the seeds of resentment and entitlement over the years. We meticulously planned our contributions, ensuring that every penny went towards the future of her kids, their education, and their dreams of a better life. I recall the early days with a sense of hope and pride. The college fund we set up for her children was, at the time, a symbol of the promise of opportunity and success. Every month, we transferred funds into the account, imagining the day when the children would walk across a graduation stage, their future bright and filled with promise. The process was straightforward and built on trust. We believed that the money would be used to secure their education and ultimately their independence. It seemed like a mutually beneficial arrangement, one that would not only help them, but also mend the strained relationship between our families. Yet, as the years passed, the narrative began to change. The once thankful recipients of our hard-earned money grew into individuals who displayed an alarming sense of entitlement. Their demeanor shifted from gratitude to arrogance, and every interaction with them was tinged with disdain and a blatant disregard for the sacrifices we had made on their behalf. It was as if the very act of supporting them had inflated their sense of self, making them believe that they were owed the world. This realization hit me slowly, but it was inevitable. The seeds of betrayal were already sown. Over time, doubts began to creep in, yet I dismissed them as worries of a concerned heart. I believed that love and generosity would ultimately be recognized, and that our family would cherish the support we offered without ever taking it for granted. Back then, I was unaware that this trust would eventually morph into a weapon against us, unraveling our bonds. Funding their college was never something we did grudgingly. In fact, my husband and I always felt it was our duty to invest in their future, believing education was the key to breaking the cycle of hardship that had plagued his family for generations. We watched as their dreams were nurtured, their interests cultivated, and for a while, it seemed as though our investment would bear fruit. My husband, ever the optimist, would often say that every cent we put into their fund was a seed for a better tomorrow. I, too, shared that sentiment, though a small part of me harbored reservations that I would later come to regret. I still remember the first time we sat down as a family to discuss the future. My sister-in-law, eyes glistening with both hope and desperation, thanked us profusely. She promised that her children would work hard and that they would honor the opportunity we provided. It felt like an emotional pact, sealed with promises and high expectations. We envisioned a future where the children, armed with education and humility, would rise above their circumstances, making us proud every step of the way. As the years went by, we witnessed the children slowly transform. The polite, eager learners we once knew started showing signs of arrogance. Small requests turned into demands, and the gratitude that once filled their conversations was replaced by a sense of entitlement. They began to refer to the fund as if it were their personal allowance rather than a lifeline thrown to them during a time of need. Despite this gradual change, my husband and I clung to our hope that they would eventually come to appreciate our sacrifices. But hope has its limits, and eventually the veneer of gratitude wore off completely. I started noticing a pattern in their behavior, subtle at first, then overt. They would make snide remarks when we inquired about their academic progress, and their responses were laced with insolence. It pained me to witness this shift, yet I tried to ignore it, convincing myself that we were merely witnessing the trials of growing up in an environment of privilege. However, the truth was far more sinister than any of us could have foreseen. Looking back now, I can see that the warning signs were always there, obscured by the glow of our initial generosity. There were subtle hints, a misplaced comment, a careless attitude toward the money that we chose to overlook in favor of maintaining a hopeful outlook. Every incident, no matter how trivial at the time, was a brick in the foundation of the eventual downfall of our trust. I remember thinking, perhaps they were just adjusting to a new level of comfort, but as the days turned into years, it became clear that their entitlement was growing at an alarming rate. The transformation was gradual yet inevitable, and the distance between what we had hoped for and the reality we faced widened with each passing day. This harsh truth haunted me. I began to notice that their behavior was no longer confined to the subtle shifts I had observed. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner, my husband casually mentioned that he had overheard a conversation that left him uneasy. The discussion had been between one of the children and a friend, and it revolved around the college funds. They boasted about how they could use the money not for paying tuition, but for living a life of luxury and reckless indulgence. It struck me like a lightning bolt. The money we had sacrificed for their education was being viewed as an endless supply of cash to fuel their entitlement. In the days that followed, I started paying closer attention. I began receiving texts and emails from concerned teachers and counselors, all hinting that the children were engaging in behavior far beyond what was expected of diligent students. Their grades were slipping, and more alarmingly, there were whispers of them being involved in activities that not only jeopardized their academic futures, but also their moral compasses. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. How could the children, who once promised to honor our trust, now be squandering not just their education, but the very hope we had invested in them? One incident, in particular, stands out with a painful clarity. I was returning home from a late shift when I noticed a commotion outside our house. A group of police officers was gathered near our driveway, and as I approached, I overheard that one of the children had been caught selling what appeared to be counterfeit electronics. The news hit me like a sledgehammer, shattering any remaining illusions of goodwill. This was not merely a case of youthful rebellion or harmless mischief. It was a blatant betrayal of the trust and sacrifice my husband and I had poured into their future. The betrayal was compounded when, later that night, the children returned home. Their demeanor was nonchalant, as if nothing was amiss. Instead of remorse, they were filled with smug satisfaction, as if their actions were justified by some twisted sense of entitlement. They taunted us, calling our efforts a waste of time and money and accusing us of treating them like charity cases rather than the independent individuals they believed themselves to be. The raw, unfiltered insults cut deeper than any physical blow ever could. As I confronted them, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and heartbreak, I demanded an explanation. They offered nothing but a cavalier shrug and a defiant glare. It was at that moment that I realized there was no going back. The children had chosen the path of self-destruction, and our support had only served to bolster their misguided arrogance. I felt a fury unlike anything I had ever experienced, a burning need for retribution that eclipsed all the disappointment and sorrow I had carried for years. That night, I lay awake, the images of those sneering faces and the sound of their careless laughter echoing in my mind. Every promise they had made, every vow of gratitude, now felt like a lie uttered in a moment of desperation. I questioned every decision that had led us here, each act of kindness that had been repaid with insolence and betrayal. The room felt suffocating as I replayed every detail over and over, my heart pounding with a mix of disbelief and righteous anger. It was clear. The foundation of trust we had built was shattered beyond repair, and nothing could ever bring it back. I vowed that my revenge would be truly exquisite. Days turned into weeks as I plotted my course of retribution. The shock of that fateful night had long subsided, replaced by a cold, calculated resolve. I spent hours researching every possible angle, every legal and ethical avenue that could ensure these children face the consequences of their actions without compromising my integrity. I realized that conventional punishment would not suffice. These individuals had to be made to understand the true cost of betrayal. My plan needed to be as precise as it was vindictive. I began by gathering evidence. meticulously compiling the texts, emails, and even surveillance footage that documented their increasingly erratic behavior. I contacted those teachers and counselors who had expressed their concerns, and their testimonies painted a damning picture of neglect and moral decay. Every piece of evidence I collected was a brick in the wall I was building to expose their deception. I also consulted with legal experts who assured me that the actions they had taken, particularly the incident involving counterfeit electronics, were serious enough to warrant legal intervention. The notion of using the law as a tool for justice appealed to me. It was a way to ensure that the punishment was both public and irreversible. With my evidence in hand, I discreetly approached law enforcement. I was careful not to let any of my personal feelings interfere, presenting the facts in a cold, factual manner. The investigation that followed was swift and unyielding. Within weeks, the authorities had raided the locations where the children were rumored to conduct their illicit activities, and several of their accomplices were apprehended. The news quickly spread through our community, a scandal that cast a dark shadow over the family that had once been held in high regard. Even as the legal process unfolded, I maintained a stoic silence, refusing to offer any form of forgiveness. Their betrayal was unforgivable, and I was determined that they would not escape the consequences of their own arrogance. My husband stood by me throughout this ordeal, his quiet support reinforcing my resolve. Together, we watched as the children's world crumbled. Legal documents, police reports, and media coverage all attested to the downfall of the once promising lives we had tried so hard to nurture. In the end, the justice meted out to them was as inevitable as it was precise. The combination of legal ramifications and public disgrace ensured that they would never be able to rebuild the privileges they once took for granted. As I sat in the quiet aftermath, I felt no satisfaction in their misfortune, only a somber relief that the cycle of entitlement had been broken. My revenge was not born out of a desire for cruelty, but as a necessary act to restore balance and hold them accountable for the betrayals they had committed. I spent many sleepless nights contemplating the magnitude of our actions, feeling a grim satisfaction as the wheels of justice began to turn. Every phone call, every court summons, and every newspaper headline served as a reminder that the consequences of their misdeeds were catching up with them. I did not take pleasure in the downfall of their privileged lives, but I recognized that it was the only fair response to the repeated betrayals I had suffered. In my heart, I knew that letting them off with a simple warning would only invite further disrespect and ruin. This was a turning point, a decisive moment where the balance of power was irrevocably altered, and I stood firmly on the side of accountability. I wholeheartedly embraced this new era with unwavering determination. With the legal process now complete, the full weight of their actions came crashing down on the children. Their academic careers were in ruins, and the scandal had irreparably tarnished their reputations. The once bright future that we had once hoped for was now a bleak reminder of their selfishness and deceit. The community, once so proud of our family ties, now whispered about the disgrace that had befallen them. Every time I walked past their names in the local news, I felt a bitter satisfaction that justice had finally been served. The transformation was not only legal, but personal. My husband and I withdrew all further financial support, severing any remaining ties that might give them an excuse to continue their entitlement. It was a difficult decision, one that weighed heavily on our hearts, but it was necessary to prevent further abuse of our generosity. Their actions had shown no remorse, and forgiving them was not an option I could entertain. There was no redemption for the betrayal that had unraveled years of goodwill. In the quiet solitude of our home, I began to rebuild what had been damaged. The process was slow, filled with moments of reflection and the occasional pang of regret for what might have been. Yet, I also recognized that this was a turning point, a moment to reclaim control over my own narrative. I embraced the hard lessons learned, understanding that trust, once broken, rarely mends itself. The pain of betrayal had been sharp, but it had also steeled my resolve, ensuring that I would never again allow my kindness to be exploited. Looking back now, I see the inevitable collapse of entitlement as a necessary purge, a cleansing that restored balance and re-established the values I held dear. It was a harsh lesson, but one that left me with a clear understanding. Betrayal is unforgivable, and revenge, when carefully executed, is a powerful force for justice. Every moment of their downfall reinforced the lesson that trust is not a commodity to be squandered, and that accountability demands a price. I watched as the once vibrant laughter and careless attitudes were replaced by silence and regret. The damage they inflicted on themselves was irreversible, a permanent reminder that betrayal leaves scars that never fully heal. In that silence, I found a bittersweet peace, knowing that the cycle of abuse had finally been broken. I accepted this final truth. Now, as I sit back and reflect on the tumultuous journey that brought me to this point, I am filled with a mix of sorrow and vindication. The years of relentless support, the countless sacrifices, and the quiet hope that our generosity would inspire gratitude have all been met with ingratitude and betrayal. I often find myself haunted by memories of the promises that were made, promises that turned out to be nothing more than empty words, spoken by those who never intended to honor them. The pain of that realization is still fresh, but it has also hardened me, leaving behind a resolve that is as unyielding as it is sorrowful. I have learned that sometimes the price of kindness is a steep one, and that there are individuals in this world who will stop at nothing to consume the generosity of others without ever offering even a scrap of gratitude in return. The journey from hope to despair and ultimately to retribution has been a bitter one, yet it was necessary. I have come to understand that forgiveness is not always the answer, especially when the wound is inflicted by those who thrive on the power of entitlement. There is a certain strength in refusing to pardon such transgressions, a strength that I've discovered within myself. My husband, ever the pillar of quiet support, has stood by me through every twist and turn of this painful saga. Together, we navigated the treacherous waters of legal battles and public scandal, and in doing so, we rediscovered the true meaning of partnership. His unwavering belief in justice and his commitment to our shared values provided me with the fortitude to see this ordeal through to its conclusion. While the scars of betrayal may never fully fade, they now serve as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of self-respect. Looking forward, I have resolved to never allow my kindness to be mistaken for weakness. I now guard my generosity with a wary eye, knowing that while compassion is a virtue, it must be tempered with wisdom and discernment. The experience has left an indelible mark on my soul, one that reminds me daily of the cost of misplaced trust. Yet, in that mark lies a newfound strength, a determination to protect myself from those who would exploit my good nature. In the quiet moments of solitude, I find solace in the fact that justice, though delayed, was ultimately served. The repercussions of their actions have reshaped not only their lives, but also mine, steering me toward a future where I am both more cautious and more empowered. I look to tomorrow with a guarded optimism, aware of the pain of the past, but resolute in my commitment to honor the lessons it has taught me. Closing this painful chapter, I embrace the hard-earned wisdom that betrayal is unforgivable and that retribution, when justly pursued, paves the way to reclaiming one's dignity with unwavering resolve.